The Galactic Collective had spent approximately 14,000 standard cycles, perfecting what they called civilization, which was really just a fancy word for making sure nothing interesting or dangerous ever happened to anyone. Every member species had evolved on worlds so pleasant, so perfectly balanced, so utterly boring, that their most significant evolutionary pressure had been deciding which fruit to eat for breakfast. Class 1 through Class 4 worlds, the galactic surveys called them, paradise spheres where gravity was a gentle suggestion, weather was an aesthetic choice, and the deadliest predator might give you a stern look if you wandered too close to its nest. Then humanity sent in their application for membership, and the entire statistical model caught fire, died, and had to be rebuilt from scratch. Earth was rated Class 1-3 on the Deathworld Index. The index only went to 15, and those top 2 slots were reserved for planets where the atmosphere was made of sulfuric acid, and the ground was literally lava. Earth didn't have acid rain or lava oceans, but what it did have was somehow worse: enthusiastic biodiversity, with a personal vendetta against the concept of survival. The gravity crushed visiting researchers into paste. The oxygen content was high enough to be classified as an industrial hazard. The weather included casual apocalypses called hurricanes that could level cities, tornadoes that played with buildings like toys, and something called winter that was basically the planet's way of saying it was tired of you existing. Earthquakes shook the ground randomly. Volcanoes erupted because they felt like it. The oceans had waves tall enough to swallow spacecraft. And then there was the wildlife, which made xenobiologists question their career choices and sometimes their will to live. Apex predators measured in tons. Microorganisms that could end civilizations. Plants that killed by touch. Animals with venom that dissolved organic matter. Insects that carried diseases capable of wiping out populations. One marine biologist had required 3 months of therapy after learning about something called a saltwater crocodile. Another had simply quit upon discovering that humans categorized certain spiders as only moderately dangerous, which meant they would merely hospitalize you instead of killing you immediately. But here was the part that kept Federation xenopsychologists awake during their sleep cycles. Humans were absolutely, completely, terrifyingly casual about all of it. They exercised recreationally in gravity that would flatten most species. They seasoned their food with chemical compounds that registered as toxins. They kept predators as household companions and called them pets, giving them names like Fluffy and Mr. Whiskers. They deliberately damaged their skin cells under solar radiation for aesthetic purposes, calling it tanning like it was a hobby instead of slow cellular suicide. They jumped out of perfectly functional aircraft for entertainment. They climbed mountains that could kill them in 17 different ways, because it was there. When humans joined the collective, everyone else developed a collective anxiety disorder. The Celestial Apex Academy represented the absolute pinnacle of galactic education, a station so advanced it orbited a binary star system and used the stellar radiation differential to power experimental physics laboratories. The station maintained perfect zero, 35 G standard gravity, atmosphere at the universal standard of 15% oxygen and 82% nitrogen, and temperature locked at exactly 19 degrees Celsius throughout all habitable zones. For the 6,000 students representing 347 different species across 89 star systems, it was an intellectual paradise. For the 23 human students currently enrolled, it felt like living inside a sensory deprivation chamber wrapped in bubble wrap. The human girl, and we will eventually get to specifics but narrative tension requires patience, had arrived at Celestial Apex 5 months prior on a full scholarship for xenocultural arts with a focus on interpretive dance. She was, by every measurable human standard, aggressively unremarkable, average height at 5'8", which meant she towered over 94% of the student population. Slender frame, which still translated to twice the muscle density of most species present. She had never served in Earth's military, never trained in combat sports beyond the mandatory self-defense courses all human children took, and her hobbies included painting watercolors, playing classical piano, and crying at sad documentaries about extinct animals. She was, in the most technical sense possible, one of the gentle humans. This presented the other species with a cognitive paradox that their brains really were not equipped to handle. On one manipulator appendage, she was human, which meant Deathworlder, which meant terrifying. On the other appendage, she was clearly not a warrior-type human, which they had decided existed despite humans, insisting their species did not actually divide into distinct castes, just had a concerning number of career options and an alarming amount of personal freedom. She wore her auburn hair in what humans called a ponytail, dressed in flowing fabrics that would not irritate skin designed to handle Earth's abrasive everything, and had learned to move in slow motion through corridors because her natural walking pace had accidentally concussed 2 students during orientation week. She spoke softly, smiled often, and once spent 3 hours helping a crystalline student with their organic chemistry homework despite having no background in that field. She just looked it up and figured it out, because humans apparently could just do that. Other students existed in a constant state of confused terror around her. They would flatten themselves against walls when she passed. Conversation died when she entered rooms. Study groups would suddenly remember urgent appointments elsewhere if she sat down nearby. She pretended not to notice, which took considerable effort and made her deeply homesick for Earth, where people understood that humans were just people and not ambulatory natural disasters waiting to happen. For 5 months, this delicate social equilibrium held. She attended lectures on xenocultural theory, excelled at comparative artistic expression, submitted an interpretive dance piece to the Academy's annual showcase that made even the notoriously critical Viridian Arts Council weep actual tears of emotional resonance, and tried very hard not to think about how the low gravity made her bones ache, or how the thin air made her feel perpetually lightheaded. Then came Xanther, Heklon, and Vriss, and the equilibrium shattered like cheap crystal. Xanther was a Crovanthi, a species that had evolved on a Class 5 world with slightly higher gravity and marginally more dangerous fauna than the galactic average. Crovanthi were hexapedal, armored with thick dermal plating, and possessed 4 primary manipulator arms that ended in serrated gripping claws. In Crovanthi society, Xanther was average. At Celestial Apex Academy, surrounded by species from even softer worlds, Xanther was an apex predator. Heklon was Saurian caste warrior, from a Class 6 world that had actual seasons and weather patterns that occasionally required shelter. Saurians were bipedal reptiloids with impressive dentition and territorial instincts, and Heklon had leveraged both into a campus reputation as someone you did not cross unless you enjoyed social suicide. Vriss was the strategist, a Meridian from a Class 5 world, possessing a distributed neural network that made pattern recognition and tactical planning almost instinctive. Vriss was also completely lacking in wisdom, which was about to become very relevant. The trio had spent the academic year establishing a protection racket that ran on intimidation and the fact that most academy students came from diplomatic families too refined for physical confrontation. They redistributed lab time, adjusted grade curves through strategic academic sabotage, and generally made existence unpleasant for anyone who did not pay the appropriate social tribute. They had carefully avoided all humans, every single one, even the gentle ones, until Vriss did the math and reached a catastrophically wrong conclusion. Observe her behavior pattern, Vriss hummed, neural clusters pulsing with false confidence. She reads poetry, creates art, avoids confrontation. She exhibits none of the warrior caste markers. She is still human, Heklon hissed, his tail twitching with nervous energy. Deathworld species. Unpredictable. Precisely why targeting her is strategically sound, Vriss continued, somehow becoming more confident in an objectively terrible idea. Other species fear humans too much to defend her. She is socially isolated, and she is too passive to retaliate effectively. Perfect target to demonstrate our dominance. Xanther's 4 eyes narrowed thoughtfully, which in Crovanthi body language indicated intense calculation. The other humans might seek retribution. They barely interact with her, Vriss observed accurately, but with completely wrong interpretation. I have monitored social patterns for 3 months. She is an outlier even among her own species. Isolated, alone. And even if they notice, what consequences do we face? Our family houses have significant political influence. The Academy will not expel us for teaching one human-appropriate social hierarchy. This was the exact moment where intelligence and wisdom revealed themselves to be completely different statistics, and Vriss had catastrophically min-maxed the wrong one. It started with small escalations, subtle things, bumping into her in corridors with just enough force to make her stumble in the low gravity, knocking her datapads and art supplies off tables as they passed, starting rumors about deathworlders being primitive savages who did not belong in civilized educational institutions. She ignored it with the patience of someone who had grown up dealing with actual problems, like weather that could kill you or wildlife that considered you food. They escalated, spilling chemical solutions near her workstation that ruined weeks of artistic projects, filing noise complaints about her quarters that forced administrative inspections, openly mocking human culture during comparative civilization seminars, calling Earth a barbaric death world that produced violent thugs instead of proper civilized beings. She remained patient, which they interpreted as weakness rather than what it actually was: calculation about whether the social and political fallout of responding was worth the temporary satisfaction. This is a critical distinction that they completely failed to understand. Humans from Deathworlds did not generally back down from threats. They assessed threat levels, calculated appropriate responses, and made strategic decisions about engagement. She had decided that 3 spoiled children playing at dominance in an environment so safe it made her teeth ache from boredom were not worth the paperwork. But patience has limits, and those limits are usually measured in units of what humans referred to as being done with this absolute nonsense. The breaking point occurred in the communal dining facility, a space engineered to accommodate the dietary requirements of 347 different species simultaneously, which made it essentially a very expensive buffet with elaborate atmospheric control zones and probably too many health code violations to count. She sat alone at a corner table, as had become habit, working through what the station nutritional algorithms claimed was Earth food, but tasted like someone had described flavor to a computer that had never experienced taste. She was reviewing notation for her upcoming dance performance, completely absorbed in choreographic theory. Xanther approached with Heclon and Vriss flanking, all 3 radiating the confidence of predators who had successfully intimidated their way through 5 months of Academy social hierarchy. Deathworlder, Xanther announced, loud enough to silence nearby conversations and draw attention from across the facility. You are occupying our table. She did not look up from her notation. Seating is unassigned, according to Academy policy. Policy has changed, Heclon hissed, displaying dentition designed to intimidate. Move, now. She carefully saved her work, set down her datapad, and looked up with eyes that had gone completely flat in the way human eyes do when they shift from social interaction mode to problem-solving mode. Anyone familiar with human behavioral patterns would have recognized this as a critical warning sign. No one present was familiar with human behavioral patterns. No, she said with careful enunciation. I am going to finish my meal. You are going to leave. And we are going to pretend this conversation never happened. Vriss's neural clusters pulsed with what the translator rendered as aggressive posturing. You believe your Deathworld origin grants you special status. You are nothing here. Just another student who does not belong among civilized species. Probably accurate, she agreed with remarkable calm. Can I return to my meal now? Xanther made the critical mistake. He reached out with 2 of his primary manipulator arms and swept her tray violently off the table, scattering approximated Earth food across the dining facility's carefully maintained flooring while simultaneously shoving her shoulder hard enough to rock her backward in the low gravity. The entire dining facility had gone completely, absolutely silent. 6,000 eyes, from 347 different species, watched with the horrified fascination of witnesses to an impending disaster. She stood up slowly, and this was where the physics became interesting. In 0.35 g, human movement transformed into something else entirely. She did not stand so much as flow upward, muscles designed for Earth's punishing gravity, making her movements in low g, almost liquid, almost predatory, almost alien in their fluid efficiency. "You are going to apologize," she said quietly, and there was something in her voice that had not been there before, something that made nearby students instinctively back away. "You are going to clean that up, and then you are going to leave me alone, permanently." Xanther laughed, a sound like grinding stones. "Make us primitive." She tilted her head slightly and smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Okay." What happened next took approximately 90 seconds and required the station's entire medical response team, 6 security officers, and several very uncomfortable conversations with the Academy administration that would echo through institutional memory for years. Xanther lunged first, all 6 limbs moving in coordinated attack patterns honed by millions of years of Croventhy evolutionary pressure. She sidestepped, which in low gravity meant she essentially teleported 4 feet laterally from his perspective, and redirected his momentum with a hand on his thorax carapace. In Earth gravity, it would have been a gentle shove. In 0.35 g, Xanther tumbled across 3 tables before impacting a support pillar with enough force to crack his dermal plating. Heclon snarled and came in from her left, trying to use his mass advantage. She dropped under his charge, planted one hand on the floor, and used it as a pivot point to sweep his legs, or leg-equivalent anatomical structures. He went down hard, and she followed up with a precisely calculated strike to his primary neural cluster that had him gasping for oxygen his respiratory system suddenly could not process. Vriss, finally demonstrating some survival instincts, turned to flee. She caught one of his primary locomotive appendages with casual ease, the kind of reflexes you developed when your homeworld tried to kill you daily. "We are not done," she said, and there was no anger in her voice, just flat statement of fact. What followed was a masterclass in controlled violence. She did not break bones unnecessarily. She did not cause permanent damage. But she very efficiently demonstrated exactly what a human could do when they stopped being patient, and the demonstration involved a lot of pressure points, joint manipulation, and the creative use of low gravity to make every throw and takedown approximately 3 times more effective than it would be on Earth. When Academy security arrived, they found Xanther unconscious with 3 limbs dislocated, Heclon trying to remember how respiratory systems functioned, and Vriss making a high-pitched keening sound that the universal translator could not process, but eventually rendered as apologies in 23 different languages simultaneously. The human girl was sitting calmly back at her table, cleaning up the spilled food with napkins, without a visible scratch or mark on her. She was not even breathing hard. "They attacked me," she said simply when security requested a statement, gesturing to the numerous witnesses and the security footage that had captured everything. "I defended myself proportionally." This sparked a 72-hour administrative crisis about what proportional meant when one party was from a Class 1-3 Deathworld, and the other parties were from Class 5 and Class 6 worlds. The girl had technically violated approximately 47 different Academy policies regarding physical confrontation. However, she had also been attacked first, had attempted verbal de-escalation multiple times, and the security footage clearly showed her using the minimum force necessary to end the threat. Legal analysis took 3 days because no one had actually written protocols for this scenario. Eventually, all parties received formal sanctions. Xanther, Heclon, and Vriss received academic probation, mandatory counseling, and would be under supervision for the remainder of their enrollment. The girl received an official warning about exercising appropriate restraint given her species' physical advantages, which was essentially the administration saying they understood she could have done much worse, and appreciating that she had not. But the real consequence, the one that would follow the trio for the rest of their lives, was social annihilation. Everyone had seen. The entire dining facility, 6,000 witnesses who watched a gentle human, an artist, a dancer, systematically dismantle 3 of the Academy's most notorious bullies like it was a minor inconvenience between meals. The story spread through station networks at faster-than-light speeds, mutating and growing in the telling. By the end of the first day, rumors insisted she had defeated all 3, while simultaneously continuing to eat her meal. By the second day, Someone claimed she had recited poetry during the fight. By the third day, the story included details about her predicting their moves before they made them, which was actually true but beside the point. The other human students, when they heard, had a collective reaction that roughly translated to mild interest, followed by returning to whatever they had been doing. One of them, a broad-shouldered woman who studied xenobiology and gave her professors heart palpitations by handling specimens rated as extremely lethal with her bare hands while humming, stopped by the girls' table in the library 2 days after the incident. "Heard you had a situation," she said casually. "It has been resolved," the girl replied without looking up from her research. "Good. If you need support, human contingent meets Thursdays. I appreciate it, but I should be fine." The woman nodded and left, and that was the extent of human solidarity, which mostly consisted of acknowledging problems existed and trusting each other to handle their own situations like functional adults. The rest of the student body underwent a complete recalibration of their understanding of humanity. The gentle ones were only gentle by choice, not by nature. The choice could be revoked without warning. The transition from patience to action happened so fast you would miss it if you blinked. And if the gentle humans were capable of that level of controlled violence, what exactly were the not gentle humans capable of? No one wanted to find out, and the human military liaison, who visited 3 weeks later, casually mentioning something called the Marine Raiders during a diplomatic function, only reinforced that particular desire to remain ignorant. In the weeks following what became known as the incident, the girl noticed several changes to her daily experience. Her personal space increased dramatically. Students gave her approximately 3 times the clearance they gave other humans. Conversations stopped when she entered rooms. Some brave individuals attempted friendship, usually species that had evolved as pursuit predators themselves and recognized kindred spirits. She handled it with the same patience she had shown the bullying, which was revealing. Humans were patient until they were not, and the transition was both instantaneous and decisive. What nobody asked, because they were too terrified of the answer, was what her life on Earth had been like to produce someone for whom a 3-on-1 fight in low gravity was barely worth mentioning to her family. What kind of world raised people who considered elaborate martial arts cultural heritage rather than military necessity? What kind of civilization taught children combat techniques as a casual after-school activity? One curious Viridian philosophy professor did ask during a private meeting about her thesis on interpretive movement as communication. "The combat techniques you demonstrated," the professor ventured carefully, their dermis flickering with nervous patterns. "On Earth, is such training common?" "Pretty standard," she said, reviewing her thesis notes. "I took self-defense classes twice weekly from age 10 through 18. Most children participate in some form of martial arts, sports, or physical training. We need regular movement or we get restless. It is considered part of basic education." "And the strength differential we observed?" She shrugged, a gesture the professor had learned indicated casual human dismissal of something they considered unremarkable. "I am not particularly strong by our standards. I focused more on endurance activities like distance running. The strength is just baseline from growing up in our gravity. Anyone from Earth could do what I did." "I see," the professor said, not seeing at all and wishing desperately they had not asked. "And you consider yourself among the gentle ones of your species." She actually laughed, which made several nearby students flinch. "Professor, I write poetry and paint watercolors. I cry during sad sections of documentaries. I have never hunted, do not enjoy weapons, and get uncomfortable around blood. By human standards, I am incredibly soft, fragile, even." The professor's dermis shifted to pale silver, indicating existential crisis. What would a non-gentle human be like? She considered this while highlighting a section of her thesis. "My older sister is a search and rescue pilot. She flies into active disaster zones, extreme weather conditions, and hostile terrain to extract people. She once landed a damaged aircraft in a hurricane using manual controls. That is a normal shift for her job." "That is normal," the professor repeated, their voice flat. "Yes. Oh, and my father is a deep ocean engineer. He works at depths and pressures that would crush most spacecraft, repairing infrastructure in conditions that would kill most humans, and considers it routine maintenance work. The professor made a sound that the translator struggled with but eventually rendered as quiet despair. "And your military forces?" the professor asked, immediately regretting it. "We probably should not discuss military specifics," she said gently, noticing the professor's distress. "But I can tell you that military service is voluntary, and they still have more applicants than positions. People want to do that work for career fulfillment." The professor excused themselves, filed the conversation under psychological hazards to avoid contemplating, and approved her thesis without further review, determining that anyone who survived childhood on a Class 1-3 Deathworld had earned academic recognition by default. The semester continued. Xanther, Heklon, and Vriss recovered physically within weeks. The psychological damage took considerably longer. They had learned a valuable lesson about assumptions, consequences, and the critical difference between appearing weak and choosing peace. It was an expensive lesson, paid in humiliation and medical costs, but it was comprehensive. Their social standing never recovered. The protection racket dissolved overnight. Students who had feared them for months suddenly found courage. The trio finished the semester in complete social isolation, exactly the position they had tried to force on their victim. The girl returned to her routine with minimal disruption. She attended lectures, completed assignments, continued developing her dance performance, and submitted poetry to various literary journals. She won third place in the Andromeda Literary Collective's annual competition, which was remarkable given that most judges assumed humans only produced technical manuals and entertainment media they called action movies. She made friends, eventually, mostly with species curious enough about humanity to overcome instinctive fear. She tutored struggling students in linguistic theory and artistic expression. She organized a small club for xenocultural appreciation that met weekly and actually became quite popular once people realized she was not going to accidentally kill anyone. Life returned to what passed for normal in an institution that had just experienced a vivid reminder that the universe was stranger and more dangerous than perfect safety could ever acknowledge. But something fundamental had shifted in the collective consciousness of Celestial Apex Academy. Humans were no longer simply a mystery or a threat category. They were a lesson about strength taking many forms, about patience not equaling weakness, and about the dangerous assumption that gentle meant harmless. The human girl became part of Academy mythology, though she actively avoided attention and found the legendary status mortifying. New students heard the story during orientation. That is the one who defeated 3 bullies without breathing hard. The story was used in conflict resolution seminars. It appeared in administrative training about handling Deathworld species. It became foundational to Academy culture. She found this deeply embarrassing. "I just wanted to eat lunch," she complained to her roommate, a Viridian who had overcome initial terror and discovered humans made excellent study partners because they could survive on caffeine and determination during exam periods. "Now people act like I am dangerous." "You are dangerous," the roommate observed, their dermis flickering with amusement. "You simply choose not to be. That is somehow more concerning than if you were always aggressive. I am a dancer who writes poetry about flowers. You are a Deathworlder who can defeat multiple opponents while remaining completely calm. These facts can coexist." The semester ended without further incident. Students returned to their various homeworlds. The girl went back to Earth for break, where she complained to her family about how station gravity was too light and everyone at school was weird about basic physics. Her sister, the search and rescue pilot, laughed until she cried. Her father, the deep ocean engineer, gave her an approving hug and told her she had handled it well. Her parents reminded her to be patient with aliens who did not understand Earth, which was somewhat ironic coming from people who thought volcano hiking was a reasonable family vacation activity. When she returned for the following semester, changes had been implemented. New students received comprehensive briefings about humans. The briefing apparently consisted of, "Do not provoke them. Yes, even the gentle ones. Especially the gentle ones. Have you heard about the poetry student incident? Here is the security footage. No, we are not joking. Maintain respectful distance. Treat them like civilized beings, and they will respond in kind. Xanthir, Heklon, and Vris had all transferred to different institutions in different sectors. Rumor suggested they had specifically requested placements at academies with zero human enrollment. The girl settled into her new routine, older, slightly wiser, and significantly more aware of her reputation. She continued dancing, writing, painting, and trying to explain to confused aliens that Earth was actually quite beautiful, once you accepted that everything was trying to kill you and learned to appreciate the aesthetic of survival. The galaxy continued its slow rotation. The collective continued maintaining its 14,000 cycles of perfect safety. And humanity continued being the statistical anomaly that made xenobiologists reconsider their career choices. But in quiet moments, when the girl sat in the observation deck watching binary stars wheel past in the station's calculated orbit, she sometimes thought about what the professor had said. About being gentle. About choice. She had chosen patience until patience was no longer viable. And then she had chosen efficiency. Both were fundamentally human traits. Humanity had conquered their death world not through simple aggression, but through intelligent response, through understanding when to endure and when to act decisively. It was a lesson the galaxy was learning, one uncomfortable incident at a time. And somewhere in the collective Xenopsychology Research Division, analysts added another data point to their growing file on human behavior, a file that had become substantial enough to qualify as a doctoral dissertation. Humans exhibit extreme patience until threshold is crossed, at which point response is immediate, decisive, and proportional to perceived threat. Even gentle caste humans, possibly especially gentle caste humans, recommended diplomatic approach. Avoid testing limits. The galaxy had spent 14,000 cycles perfecting safety, but humans had required less than a century to remind everyone that safety was a choice, not a guarantee. That strength was not merely physical capability, but knowing when to deploy it and when to restrain it. And that sometimes the most dangerous individual in any given room was the quiet one painting watercolors in the corner, patiently waiting for everyone else to learn better. The human girl completed her degree 3 years later with highest academic honors, received offers from 17 different research institutions, and went on to become a prominent xenocultural theorist. She published 9 books on interspecies communication through artistic expression. She never experienced another physical confrontation, which disappointed absolutely no one. But the story of the incident lived on, transmitted through generations of academy students as reminder, warning, and lesson about the danger of assumptions. Do not bully the quiet ones. Do not mistake patience for weakness. And absolutely, under no circumstances, should anyone test a deathworlder who has chosen to be gentle. Because that gentleness is a choice. And choices can always be revoked. The universe remains vast, strange, and full of mysteries that challenge understanding. But perhaps the greatest mystery of all was humanity itself, a species that had crawled out of hell, adapted to craterid, impossible conditions, and decided their primary contribution to galactic civilization would be art, poetry, and interpretive dance. The galaxy was still processing whether that was inspirational or absolutely terrifying. The answer, as with most things involving humans, was definitely both.